They came to the city like a set piece, scarves flaring, breath fogging in the early morning, and a tidy plan for perfection in the pocket. The Namutebi family had rehearsed the season for weeks, outfits coordinated to a thread, smiles practiced in 1,000 bathroom mirrors, and a list of backdrops across Kampala promised that one perfect Christmas photo. Baba waved a list like a map, Mama checked angles by tilting her head, little Osha counted the seconds until the camera shutter would freeze them forever. The whole house smelled of cinnamon and petrol, a strange and homey mix that seemed to say, "Today we will be seen," yet even before the market lights blinked awake. In the rush past vendor stalls and shimmering mall windows, the phone that held all hope, the device with filters, timers, and the family's archive of smiles, slipped like a fish from Baba's coat. No one noticed at first, they were all chasing frames. When the discovery came, it cut through their choreography like a sudden drum. Osha's mouth followed the shape of a lost word. Mama's practiced smile blurred and shook. In that tiny, panic-filled heartbeat, the family realized they had traded being together for making sure the world could see them together. Kampala hummed around them, a living thing of horns, laughter, and wafts of street food simmering in the early light. Market stalls flashed like jewelry boxes, beads, wraps, roasted maize steaming in paper cones. The family's plan faltered into the rhythm of the street. People moved with purpose, with gossip, with time to spare. The city's sound was a net, every voice snagged at their worry. The lost phone was small but mighty in its absence, a missing conductor in their symphony of holiday preparation. Each family member touched what they could not have back. Baba peered into pockets with the tenderness of a man counting a ledger of loss. Mama retraced steps like a mapmaker erasing mistakes. Osha wanted to cry, but her silence sounded more like a question. Grandpa, who had accompanied them out of a stubborn pride and a quieter curiosity, sat on a low wall and watched the city as if trying to find the thing the city might hide. For the first time that morning, they were together without the camera's promise guiding them, and a new kind of fear grew. What happens to a family who cannot photograph their joy? 100 hands could have found the phone, a fruit seller wiping mango juice from his fingers, a bus conductor stacking tickets, a child playing marbles by the curb. They asked, they pleaded, they described the phone with technical affection, as if naming its make and model would conjure it back. The market responded with warmth and a few sympathetic taps on shoulders, but no miracle. A vendor offered cold mandotsi and a shrug. A conductor pointed toward the bus park. The city seemed helpful but indifferent, a place that carried loss as much as laughter. As the day grew heavier, a quiet decision unspooled among them. They could retrace every step until dusk fell and the city swallowed their shadows, or they could stay where light warmed pockets of faces and see what it felt like to be unphotographed. Baba, who had earlier scolded the idea of losing time, looked at his family and breathed out a sound that was almost a laugh. "Perhaps," he said softly, "this is a signal. We seek images but the day insists on being lived." Nobody argued. The plan for the perfect photo dissolved into something less neat, a spill of possibility. They let their feet take decisions for a while. Feet, in Kampala, no many secret routes, a shortcut past a banana grove, a path that smells of wet earth after a sudden shower, an alley where murals tell stories with their colors. The Namutebi family followed the pulse of the city, and soon found themselves near a lane painted in joyous blues and oranges. Children's laughter drifted like music. A gate stood open, and on its other side something gentle and bright came toward them, a morning full of singing. Through the gate was a children's home, modest in its build but rich in care. A sign, hand-painted with a sun and 3 small figures, "Welcome visitors." Mama's heart skipped not because of a perfect pose but because a chorus of little voices turned toward them, curious and candid. The family had expected to continue their search for the phone, but the place moved in with the same soft insistence as sunrise, suddenly. The day had new neighbors. They were not yet sure if the gate would take them in, but the laughter that met them felt like a mild command to stay inside the children's home. Walls were papered with drawings, animals with wide eyes, homes made with so many windows, stars that nodded as if approving every idea. Children skipped between a mat and a cupboard of books, and a woman with a patient smile held a broom like one holds a conversation. She introduced herself as Sonyu, which means joy, and her name felt like an answer to a prayer they hadn't known to pray. She welcomed the family as if they had always belonged to the rhythm of that place. Boba, flustered and apologetic, explained their loss. Sonyu listened and then, with a lightness that surprised them, offered them tasks. "We need hands more than pictures today," she said, folding laundry as if wrapping time itself. At first, the family offered clumsy help, Boba folding blankets like a man learning to fold a new language, Mama sorting donated clothes with fierce concentration, and Osha making friends with a shy boy named Keto who smelled of orange peel and hope. In the modest work, a different kind of picture began to form, one the phone had never taught them to take. Work started small and honest. The house had a rhythm, sweeping that sounded like a soft drum, arranging plates that chimed like promises, and folding clothes until the room smelled of soap and fresh cloth. Each task was a stanza in a poem about ordinary care. Grandpa hummed old songs while tying loose shoestrings, his voice wove through the house and settled children into comfortable listening. Asha learned to tie a shoelace in 3 precise loops and suddenly felt powerful in this simple mastery. Conversations unfold like paper boats on a gentle stream. Sonyu told stories of mornings when the house was quieter, of nights when stray rainfall brought dancing to the tin roof, of donors who came and left like birds. The children told the Namutebi family about their small triumphs. Amina could recite the alphabet backward, Keto knew every flavor on the vendor's cart by smell alone. In those stories the family saw life not as curated frames but as a living archive, a tapestry of little moments that did not need editing to matter. Osha, who had been counting small things since birth, was given a job that mattered more than any picture had. She was to befriend the quietest child. That child, named Juma, kept his head tucked as if the world might spill him out if he looked up too much. Osha approached him with the careful choreography of someone who understood what it meant to be washed. She brought a mango she had traded earlier. Something that tasted like luck and sun. They did not speak much at first. Instead, Osha sat and unwrapped the mango slowly, and the two of them ate with a politeness measured by hunger and hope. The act of sharing, simple and unhindered by lenses, eased Jumo's shoulders. He began to show Osha drawings he kept folded in a tattered corner, little words full of animals that wore people's shoes. In that exchange, Osha felt a warmth that no stage smile had ever given her, a warmth that came from attention paid without the expectation of a perfect angle. Even as warmth spread, the absence of the phone lingered like a shadow on the edge of every room. It visited them in sudden, quiet ways, Boba catching himself rehearsing a smile he might later edit, Mama checking pockets as if the phone might return like a shy visitor. The city had not returned their device, and their social feeds would remain empty of the images they had planned. Yet the children's home had its own way of displacing that shadow. While folding blankets, Boba found himself listening more than speaking. He learned faces, not the curated faces of their planned photos but the angles that came from living, a freckle near a jaw, a laugh that hid a missing tooth. A scar on a knee that was a rebellion turned into wisdom. Without the screen between them, His memory began to make portraits that were warmer and more human than any picture. He realized, in a slow unspooling, that losing the phone had removed the glass barrier they had built around their experience. Sonia announced a small feast to mark the day, no grand banquet, but a sharing of things that tasted of home. Pots were brought out, and smoke curled up like old stories. Rice steamed, beans simmered in a sauce that smelled of onions and patience, bananas were fried until they smiled. The city's late heat eased as clouds gathered and lanterns were lit one by one, little moons on strings. The family and the children arranged themselves around a low table, and the act of eating together felt ceremonious without being performed. The food tasted better than any post-meal could have tasted because it was eaten with hands that had worked and laughed and told stories all morning. Usher fed Juma a piece of fried banana with the careful pride of someone offering a gift. Baba found himself laughing at jokes he had once cut short to check a camera's angle. Mama pressed her palms together in a small, private gratitude, and Grandpa nodded as if to say, "This is the kind of photograph my heart keeps." In the simple communion of a shared meal, the family discovered a hush that said some things do not need to be captured, they only need to be lived. After the meal, 2 battered Santa hats were produced from a donation box. One was bright red with a mischievous sheen, the other had faded so gently that its color suggested memory more than design. The children insisted on a parade, and the Namutebi family found themselves swept into it, Baba pretending to be Stan Santa, Mama dancing a little too free, Usher leading the march like a small but earnest general. The heads of the house were light with joy and a touch of embarrassment, because their moves were not curated but wildly sincere. During the parade, the hats changed hands like stories. Juma, who had been the quietest, placed the faded hat on Grandpa's head with a reverence that made everyone laugh and then hush. In that silence sat a gentle truth: the hats did not need to be new to be full of meaning. The worn fabric seemed to hold many small winters, and under it, faces glowed. For the Namutebi family, this was another small defeat for the idea that perfection has to be polished. Imperfection, they learned, carried more warmth than any filter. While arranging toys later that afternoon, Usher felt something paper-thin tucked behind an old cupboard. She tugged and pulled until a crumpled note slid into her palm. It was a letter written in a child's uneven handwriting, full of spelling mistakes and big-hearted sentences. The letter thanked someone for a borrowed book and promised that one day the child would return the favor. Usher read it aloud, and the words wrapped the room in a hush that felt holy in its ordinary way. The letter reminded the family that little acts of giving ripple far more than any single image can show. Sonia explained that many items at the home carried stories like this: promises left, returns that never arrived, notes of gratitude folded and kept like seed to be planted. The family felt humbled. Their own loss, a phone, seemed poetry compared to a lifetime of losses and returns that these children had carried. Folding the note into a safe place, Usher thought of all the pictures she would never take and all the memories she would keep, and the thought made her both proud and oddly fierce. Late afternoon brought a challenge. A delivery of clothes arrived, more than the small house could manage at once. Boxes toppled with a soft thunder of fabric. The Namutebi family, exhausted from the day's emotional exertions, also had to face small frustrations: mismatched sizes, a missing pair of shoes, and a child who cried because a favorite shirt had been given away. Tension. The kind that lived in the space between kindness and fatigue, threaded through them. For a moment, Baba snapped, not loudly, but the kind of voice that echoes with disappointment. The room stilled. Mama's face went tight with the memory of their morning panic. Usher looked down at her hands, suddenly small compared to the weight of adult temper. Then Sonia knelt and, with a calm that had been weathered by many storms, suggested a different approach. They treat disappointment like a bundle of sticks to be separated, not a tree to be uprooted. They breathed, sorted, and in the act of gently rearranging the chaos, they found patience. The small flame of anger cooled into a workable ember of resolve. Night fell and the yard filled with a constellation of handmade lanterns. Each light swung with the soft certainty of a promise. The children gathered with instruments, a tin drum, a strummed guitar, a bottle that served as flute. Grandpa, who had sat quiet most of the day, found his voice and began to sing. His voice was not trained, but it had the timbre of someone who tells truth with familiar words. The lanterns trembled like gentle hearts. As music held the night, stories were traded between songs. Baba told a tale, slightly exaggerated, of a holiday many years ago, the kind of story that glows brighter each time it's told. Mama shared memories of cold mornings warmed by bread and laughter. The children watched them with wide eyes, as if learning manners of the past. In that circle, the Namutebi family felt woven into a tapestry that stretched beyond their small worry about a phone. The night's light made everything softer, forgiving corners and elevating small human things into something like ritual warmth. A visitor came late that evening, a woman whose hands bore paint and whose smile arrived like a small gift. She carried with her a camera that whirred softly, an old DSLR that belonged to a local news photographer who had once documented community stories. She'd heard about the children's home and come to take photos for a piece about giving. When she realized the Namutebi family had lost a phone earlier that day, she offered something unexpected, not the phone, but her time. She proposed to take pictures, but not the staged, perfected ones the family had sought. She photographed hands that had learned to mend, smiles that showed unedited teeth, and small gestures of care. She asked for permission to share the images with the community, but she promised the shots would not be used for likes or for marketing. The family hesitated, remembering their earlier obsession with control. Yet, as she clicked, the camera seemed less like a barrier and more like a storyteller's pen. The photos that emerged, viewed later on her laptop screen, were honest and unembellished, and strangely, they looked like the way the family felt. Looking at the photos with the woman, the Namutebi family noticed something they had not expected. Their faces were not polished, but they were alive. The photographs held the trace of laughter that had not been timed, the lines of care that no filter could smooth away, and the warmth of skin that remembered hands held. Mama cried a little then, not from grief but from a quiet relief. It was as if they had been allowed to see themselves without the need to edit a single pixel. The woman nodded as if she understood more than the family could say. Good pictures, she said softly, are not made by the light alone, but by what the light finds. The family sat with that turning in their chest. The lost phone was still missing, but the permission to be imperfect was found. Grandpa, who had watched the screen with mild curiosity, chuckled and whispered, "We were chasing a small glass and missed the whole market." It was a simple confession, and it opened them up to learning more. The next morning, there was no photo agenda. The family woke under thin sheets and the house's early light, and for the first time in a long while their waking was not punctuated by the pressing need to be seen. They made tea and porridge and moved through the house with a slower grace. The children's home bustled around them and the city outside peeked in like a neighbor who had too much to say. There was a calm in their unpressured pace, like a song not yet hurried. They took time to listen to children recite poems and to fix a loose wheel on a small cart. Baba sat with a child who wanted to ask why people sometimes lost things. He answered, honestly, that sometimes loss makes room for other kinds of finding. The idea seemed to settle in the room like a soft cloak. For the Namutebi family, the question of what to do with the rest of the day had become less about images and more about a series of small promises to keep hands busy and hearts open. A donation brought a bright coat that had once belonged to an older child who had moved away. It was almost too small but perfectly patched with love. Kato eyed it like a treasure, and for a moment the house filled with a quiet negotiation about who should wear it and who should keep it. The coat became a symbol, not of scarcity but of intention. They decided that what mattered was not ownership but the dignity of being wrapped in something warm. Mama took the coat and, with a needle and thread borrowed from Sonyu, stitched it to fit Kato's shoulders properly. The act of mending was deliberate and intimate, the thread pulling two fabrics into one careful seam. When Kato wore it, he stood differently, like a child who had been given a small sovereignty. The Namutebi family watched the way the coat transformed him, not as a picture, but as a living change. Once again, they learned a lesson about presence. Warmth given freely has a weight that no photograph can hold. A sudden storm rolled in the late afternoon, turning the sky into a single great drum. Rain hammered the tin roof with a percussion that sent a thrill through the house. Instead of dampening spirits, the rain brought out instruments and voices. Children drummed on metal cans and sang in rounds that rose above the storm's rhythm. The family joined in, their voices low at first and then growing bold as if the rain were an audience cheering them on. The storm made the world smaller and softer at once. Outside, the city's clamor diminished. Inside, the community gathered like a single saved ember. The Namutebi family discovered joy in the suddenness of weather that could not be anticipated or photographed in full, it could only be felt. Grandpa played a tune that slid between memory and invention, and for a little while everything else fell away. They were not performers, they were participants, and the music told them so. Midway through their day of giving and listening, Boba found himself remembering a fear that had shadowed him since he was a boy, that without visible proof of joy, their life would be judged empty. He had worked to build a household that looked like success on paper and on screens. In the children's home, where joy was often fragile and unadvertised, that fear felt small and foolish, but still it tugged at him. He confided this to Mama in a soft corridor, and she listened without offering easy answers. Mama's reply was simple: "We have been learning that what you keep in your chest is better than what you show the world." It was not a triumphant pronouncement but a steadying thought. Boba breathed it in and felt less like a man judged by his possessions and more like someone learning to be judged by his heart. The fear did not vanish, but it softened, and in that softening he found room to keep learning. Just as dinner preparations hummed with calm, a city runner, a small man with quick feet and a larger smile, arrived at the gate, holding a phone like a flag. He'd found it on a bus seat, he said, and had followed the trail of last known numbers to the children's home. The family's shock was less than the quiet gratitude that swelled across their faces. The phone, now warmer from being carried, felt less like a missing treasure and more like a thing that had lived a small adventure. When Boba took hold of the device, he felt both relief and a strange letdown. For a moment he held it like someone who had seen an old friend and discovered the friend had changed. The phone contained the draft of pictures they had never taken and 1,000 small notifications. But also, in the space of the previous day, the family had made memories no notification could contain. The phone's return was a kindness wrapped in reality, and it arrived with a lesson attached. Possession is not the same as presence. With the phone back in their hands, the family faced temptation to post the photos the woman had taken, to announce their day of giving and the graceful return of the device. For a brief week of heartbeats, they imagined likes, comments, and the warm flash of approval that screens can give. Mama thumbed through the photos, fingers hovering over the share button like someone deciding whether to open a door to applause. They paused. Grandpa, with a knowing look, said nothing. The children's home was not a stage, he murmured, and applause is not always needed to know that an act mattered. It was a small argument, a test of the old instincts. In the end, they chose to share only one image, a simple photo of hands holding a pot of stew, not their faces. The image spoke of community without taking ownership of the children's stories. The decision felt respectful and brave. It felt like a new kind of presence. One of the children, Amina, had an unexpected gift. She could string words like beads into stories. She wrote a short poem and handed it to Mama with the proud seriousness of a priest presenting an offering. The poem was about a city that gave children lanterns and bread, about people who learned to be enough for each other. Mama read it aloud, and the words wrapped the room like a soft blanket. The poem touched something in their chest that no photograph had yet reached. It made them see what their day had been beyond images, a small revolution of care. The family listened to Amina explain the lines, and her voice made the poem live. They decided right then to memorize it, to carry it back to their home as a talisman. The poem became a promise they could hold in their mouths and hearts and not just on a screen. When it came time to leave, the city had turned into a portrait made of light and shadow. The Namutebi family walked the road home under strings of street lamps, their silhouettes long and familiar. They carried small packages and a gentle tiredness that smelled like contentment and porridge. The return journey was quiet, filled with a companionable silence that wore no masks. On the way, they stopped at a small stall and bought sugarcane pieces, which they ate with sticky fingers and quiet conversation. Each piece was a small, sweet punctuation to a day that had given them more than they had set out to find. The city hummed its nightly lullaby. The family walked with it, not as an audience but as woven pieces of the night's story. In the back of Boba's mind, a picture began to form that had nothing to do with the camera, a house full of people who chose presence first. Back at home, the family gathered around a small brazier, the fire throwing gentle orange onto their faces. The phone, now charging on the table, seemed quieter than before, less an owner of them and more an object among others. They spoke of the day with a kind of reverence, telling each other what they had learned, Mama about humility, Boba about the thinness of appearances, Usher about how small hands can change someone's mood, and Grandpa about listening. The conversation had the cadence of elders sharing wisdom and children absorbing it. They did not make proclamations so much as accept new truths like little presents. The moral of the day was not yet neatly packaged. It was a seed planted in the dark soil of their memory. They fell asleep with the scent of stew in their clothes and the feeling of a day spent in a manner their photo album had never taught them. Days after the event, the family found their home subtly altered. Photos still lined the shelf, neat and smiling, but something had shifted in how they took pictures. They found themselves more present when together, letting their camera sit idle on the table for entire afternoons. The children's home visited them in small ways, an invitation to a community lunch, a letter in the mail, and the occasional surprise call from Sonyo. At the market, friends asked about their perfect photos and the family responded differently each time. Sometimes they shared a trimmed version, sometimes they spoke of the small tasks of the home in fuller sentences. Their stories spread not as a spectacle but as an encouragement. Strange as it was, losing the phone had given them a new sense of freedom. It taught them a lesson that was quiet and steady. Life's richest images are not always the ones you take, sometimes they are those you leave. The family decided to start a small tradition. Every Christmas, they would spend a day at the children's home. It was not a decision made from publicity but from the warmth that had stayed with them. a warmth that wanted company and a place to grow. On their first intentional visit after the incident, they arrived with a crate of books and a crate of old board games. They arrived with time, which proved to be the most valuable gift. The children taught them new games, some of which involved 2 wooden spoons and much laughter. Mama found herself enjoying competitions she had once avoided because they had threatened the carefully curated image she wanted. The family learned to lose with grace and to win with humility. The tradition was simple: presence over presentation, hour over image, and laughter over likes. 1 year later, a small crisis arrived: a leak in the children's home roof during heavy rains. The family received a call and rushed over, remembering the urgency of hands-over captions. They arrived to find buckets spread under drips and children trying to sleep in the pattern of rain. There was a haste in the air that made everyone walk without ceremony. Together they patched roofs, moved beds, and sang to keep spirits high. Baba, who had once measured himself in successes, realized his hands had learned new competencies. Mama navigated logistics with a calm he would not have expected from her earlier cautious self. The crisis was handled not by a single heroic act but by shared sweat and thrift. When they were done, the house was less perfect but more solid. Trust grew like moss in the cracks, small, persistent, and green. At that same moment of crisis, a new face arrived, a child who had wandered into the compound seeking shelter and who would later be known as Tommy. Tommy's arrival reminded the family that community is porous and sometimes needs to make room for unexpected guests. The Namutebi family, already changed by their past, welcomed Tommy more readily than they might have before. They made him a small bed and taught him their songs. He responded with a quick smile and a remarkable ability to pick up the rhythm of the house. His presence reinforced their commitment to being a family that gives itself in time and labor rather than image. Tommy stayed, and his settling in became a quiet testimony to how open doors become home when people care enough to keep them open. Years accumulate small things: the softening of a father's hairline, Usher's certainty becoming a quiet backbone, Mama's laugh lines deepening with genuine amusement. The family recollected the day without the phone as a hinge year, a moment when they pivoted toward each other and toward community. Memories stacked up like carefully folded clothes, some bright, some faded, but all useful. The children in the home grew. Some left, some returned as volunteers, and the house itself accumulated history like a well-loved book. The Namutebi family learned to treat memory as craftsmanship. They told stories with intervals of silence that honored what they had seen and felt. When they showed pictures now, they pointed less to composition and more to story. Children visiting their home learned to listen to the way adults spoke about the past, not as a display but as a map for future action. In these soft recollections, they discovered that the past becomes moral when it shapes how you act today. On the 10th anniversary of the day they lost and then found their phone, the family and the children's home held a small festival. They invited neighbors, vendors, and friends from far corners of Kampala. There were drums and dancing, food stalls that sold spicy samosas and sweet mandotsi, and a storytelling circle that wound like a river through the afternoon. The festival was messy and bright, a celebration of being alive and being together. At the center of the event, the family placed a sign: "Christmas is lived, not performed." It was simple and perhaps a little bold. Guests read it and nodded. For those who had followed the family's story, the sign felt like a final line in a long conversation. The festival's highlight was when children and adults made lanterns together, each one a tiny promise that light given freely returns in warmth. A local journalist, who had once photographed the family in the children's home, published a piece about their tradition. The story resonated, spreading like a gentle breeze across social media and local papers. Suddenly the family's private lesson began to get attention beyond their small circle. People wrote messages, called to offer donations, and some sent letters about how they had been inspired to act differently. This newfound attention tempted the family in strange ways. Offers for speaking events arrived, and a company proposed a sponsored post that would align perfectly with their old obsession, a glossy, curated tale of redemption. They faced a choice that tested how truly they had changed. Would they let publicity turn their practice into performance again, or would they protect the fragile authenticity they had nurtured? The decision would show the depth of their transformation. After deliberation, they declined the sponsored post. They accepted modest help, enough to mend the roof and stock the pantry, but refused deals that would monetize the children's stories. The family realized that their greatest temptation was to turn charity into spectacle. Instead, they chose to share lessons and not the children's intimate photographs. They still told their story, but they did so with care and limits. Their choice was met with respect and some criticism. Not everyone understood the restraint. But the family found peace in their decision. The balance between pride and purpose was not always easy to maintain. Pride wanted applause, purpose wanted a steady, smaller light. They chose the light that would last. Osha grew and, with her parents' blessings, left home to study development. Her education deepened the family's capacity for good. From afar, she continued to visit the children's home and returned with new ideas. A reading circle, a small garden, and plans to teach children basic bookkeeping to help them manage small projects. Her leaving was less of a goodbye and more of a widening, a spreading of the family's presence into the world. Her occasional messages home were full of stories and small frustrations. She learned that theory and practice often disagree, and that humility is the compass that keeps work from becoming vanity. The family watched her grow with pride that felt quieter now. It was rooted in knowing the work mattered more than the applause it might bring. Years later, Boba found himself smiling at the thought of his old urgency to be seen. He recognized his former hunger for validation in the way his fingers once hovered over a phone camera. He mourned, softly, the man he'd been, not with regret but with an understanding that he had been led by a false promise. The mourning was gentle, a small rite of shedding. They performed a small ritual not of superstition but of remembrance. Around a pot of stew, they emptied their old folders of curated photos. They did not delete them, memory is messy, but they set them aside. The act felt like closing a chapter with gratitude rather than denial. In that quiet act, they made room for new habits of being present. Years passed and the children who had once lived in the home grew into young people who left to make their own marks. Some returned as teachers, some as nurses. And a few traveled far and wide. The Namutebi family kept in touch with them through letters and visits, and the house that had once been a simple refuge had become a launchpad. The family's investment in presence turned out to be a long-term seed that sprouted beyond their expectations. Reunions were loud and messy affairs, full of stories about kitchens where new recipes were tried, workplaces where kindness mattered, and children of their own who learned the songs the Namutebis had taught them. These returns were a testament that consistent presence, small acts repeated, can change the arc of many lives. One quiet afternoon, Grandpa found an old film camera in a drawer. It had belonged to a relative who loved photography but used to say, "Pictures are good. Living is better." He cleaned it with respectful hands and held it like a relic. They took a few photos with it, but this time the intent was different, to make albums not for public display but as private letters between themselves. The camera's mechanical click felt nostalgic rather than urgent. The prints, when they came back from a small shop, were imperfectly charming. They were tangible reminders, not broadcast. The family placed them in a simple album and kept it on the shelf. When they opened it, they were not searching for validation, they were remembering. The difference was subtle and profound. Years later, the children's home became a hub for local volunteers. The Namutebi family's tradition had inspired others. Saturday mornings were full of people offering skills, sewing lessons, tutoring, and small business coaching. The community's web of care grew richer, anchored by the simple rule they had learned: show up. The family watched as presents multiplied into many hands and many small projects. They never forgot the day without their phone. It remained a story told to newcomers as a parable of how small losses can widen the path to generosity. The moral threaded through interviews and casual conversations: Christmas is lived, not performed. People began to echo the phrase, not as a slogan but as a habit. A difficult new year arrived with economic pressures that tested everyone's resolve. Donations thinned and the home faced decisions about priorities. Panic tempted some old instincts: to shout louder on social media, to stage a spectacle that would bring immediate funds. Instead, folks who had been touched by the Namutebi family's example organized quietly: bake sales, small patron networks, and a rota of volunteers who committed to longer terms. The home weathered the storm, not because of one grand rescue but because of steady, concerted presence. The family learned again that sustaining care is like tending a garden. Daily watering matters more than loud declarations. In the end, the children's home stood firm, a little thinner but no less luminous. One winter, mild by Kampala's standards, a woman returned to the home as a teacher. She had been a shy child the Namutebis met on their first day, and now she spoke with a confidence that made them proud. She taught classes in reading and storytelling, paying forward the kindness she had once received. Her return was proof that presence begets presence. The family attended the first class and listened as children read lines full of enthusiasm. They watched the teacher's eyes shine with small victories: a child who read a sentence without stumbling, another who raised a question and found an answer. Their hearts were full in a way that no photograph could contain. They had begun a chain of care that outlived their original intentions. Years had taught them many things. The phone was now an unremarkable object in a house full of memories. The Namutebi family continued their tradition of spending Christmas at the children's home, and every year it felt like the first time: fresh, messy, and real. They had moved from performance to participation, from showing to giving. In quiet moments around a brazier or beneath strings of lanterns, they repeated the phrase that had become their compass: Christmas is lived, not performed. The moral that threaded through all these chapters is simple and stubborn: presence matters. It is not about the perfect frame or the brightest filter. It is about hands that mend, ears that listen, and feet that go where help is needed. Their story, equal parts mistake and learning, shadow and light, became a folktale of the city, told not to correct, but to invite. It invited others to put down screens and pick up soup. Leaders, to swap stage smiles for sticky-fingered laughter, and to prefer human warmth over curated perfection. In Kampala's glow, the Namutebi family found their greatest picture not in pixels but in people, and that picture, warm and living, lasted a lifetime. And so, dear listener, our tale of the Namutebi family settles into a soft, glowing ending, a story born from a lost phone, and transformed into a living legacy of presence, kindness, and quiet, steady love. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest gifts are not wrapped, staged, or posted. They are lived in real moments, shared hands, and honest laughter, moments that never need a camera to matter. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If this story warmed your heart, made you reflect, or reminded you of the beauty in simple things, Don't forget to subscribe to Fables by Timo for more tales that touch the heart and stir the soul. Until I bring you a new story, keep your heart open. And remember, every fable hides a truth. Bye for now.